Trip, you said when you founded Electronic Arts, your initial vision for the company was for it to create simulation sports games that played as realistically as possible. Do you think modern-day EA Sports lives up to that vision?
Not really.
Yes, EA Sports has fallen off in quality, 100%. There's no doubting it.
The Madden games are so bad now, it retroactively makes me nostalgic for the Madden games from 5 years ago, which I didn't enjoy at the time, which were still very flawed.
They have regressed, taking certain things out of the game that were in the game before.
It's all about money. It's all about, selling these DLCs and selling these packs,
I mean, you see what happened with NBA Live. They continue to get shelved, and that whole market got taken over by 2K. You look at Madden, they had so many features back in the day that still aren't in the game, now.
This 12-year-old just grabbing his parents' credit card, just swiping away, and he just put it on the console. It's one click of a button.
It's all about money, money, money.
All people will look on for EA Sports through the Xbox One and PlayStation 4 era is how much of a fall they've had, not financially, but in goodwill and towards the community, and how much worse it could get if they really don't start to turn things around.
In 1982, Trip Hawkins, an employee of Apple at the time, started working on creating his own company, one that produces and develops computer games. For some time, Trip had been working on creating an NFL simulation computer game.
I particularly liked simulations, and by that I mean any kind of a game that was trying to recreate something plausibly from a real-world adult situation. And I'm using that term kind of generously because, of course, I found the first generation of card and board games themed around sports. They were pretty inadequate, but some of them were doing some decent jobs of simulating statistical outcomes. And I remember a little baseball game where it had these little spinners. And you'd have a Babe Ruth circle of paper, and you'd put it on the spinner, and he would have a big fat pie slice where if it landed there, he'd hit a home run. And then he'd have another big one for a strikeout. And so I would notice these little details about how they were designing and making these games. And I kind of realized that I could probably do it myself, and that really got kicked off later because I became a football fan and a football player. And there just simply was not a good simulation game about football. And so I decided to make one. So as a teenager, I was making my first game. And it was, a game you played with cards and charts and dice and, lookup tables and stuff. And it's still a pretty good game. I don't think a better tabletop paper football simulation game has existed either before or since that game. I really understood football, and that was just a feeling I had at that time was, wow, I feel like I really understand this stuff, and I have a real interest in trying to do it in a way that's authentic. And so that just sort of propelled my career direction towards wanting to make games like that could run on computers.
Originally called Amazing Software, the company eventually settled with the name Electronic Arts. Trip and his employees chose the name because they felt that video games were an art form, and the developers, not the executives, were the artists.
I realized what the potential was and started to have a chance to work with computers in college. And, of course, one of the first things I did in my spare time on the time-sharing mini computer was create a Super Bowl simulator. And actually did a pretty good job with that, and I ran an official simulation before. It was an early 1970s Super Bowl where my game predicted that Miami would beat, I think it was the Vikings, 23-6, and in the real game they beat them 24-7. So anyway, I just love doing this kind of stuff. And of course, I realized that it was going to take a while before computers got into homes. So I started thinking about when that might be and when it might become possible to make games like this, or games that would later become games like Madden football.
EA's first sports game was one-on-one, Dr. J vs. Larry Bird, a basketball game that was the very first of its kind.
I knew a lawyer that knew another lawyer that knew the agent for Julius Erving, Dr. J. And this was the first EA sports game, and I basically had designed this game to be something practical that we could do on an 8-bit machine. And, you only had to animate 2 players, and that became Dr. J and Larry Bird go one-on-one. But I wanted to, get celebrity players. And thankfully, through these connections, we were able to reach Julius's agent and get him interested. So we made a deal with him, and then of course once we had that, then it was easy to have them introduce us to Larry Bird's agent. I'm pretty sure Julius's agent knew him, and do a similar deal with Larry Bird. And that was really the first time that celebrities had ever been on screen in a video game. And of course, it was the first time that happened with athletes, and it was a success.
For Trip's simulation football game, which would eventually become known as John Madden Football, Hawkins originally wanted Joe Kapp to be the face of the game.
Once that game was successful, I thought, okay, now I'm going to plan something more ambitious and really focus on football, because that's the sport I cared about the most at that time. And I had a brief flirtation with Joe Kapp, the former quarterback of the Minnesota Vikings, who at that time he'd become the head football coach at the University of California in Berkeley. And I was in the Bay Area, and I'm thinking, I don't know that there's any one football player that I'd really want to build a brand around and have the cover a story of a football simulation game. But I sure would like to have a coach help me fill in some of the design details in the game that go beyond my own football knowledge. And I thought there would be other good things that come from a relationship like that. So I approached Joe Kapp, and I was looking to just pay him a consulting fee, and then I'd go, create the brand. It would be an EA-owned brand, and we wouldn't have to pay anybody any royalties. But even though Joe was really interested, he then followed up later and said, I've decided I want my name on the front, and I want to get a royalty. And I thought, okay, all right. If a good coach is going to need to have that kind of reaction, then I might as well go to the top of the food chain. If I'm going to have to pay royalties and to have a good coach, I want to get John Madden. Because Madden at that time, he was already, obviously a Super Bowl winning coach, great coach. He was already a multiple Emmy award winning broadcaster. He was also the ace hardware man. He was also in all the Miller Lite beer commercials, breaking through barriers and saying, hey, wait a minute. So he was super high profile and very good at what he did and very successful. And of course, he had a lot of the knowledge and insight that I needed. And by that time, it had gotten to be pretty easy to, amongst the agents that we knew, to figure out, okay, which agency's representing him and how do we contact them. And basically, I flew off to New York, met with his agent, and we worked out a deal. And that led to the reasonably famous story about me with a couple of my production guys flying into Denver and getting on a train, because at that time he didn't have the Madden jersey yet. He was still taking Amtrak. And then we just spent 2 days on the train, cruising up through the Rocky Mountains and across the west to Oakland. And just hung around all day for a couple of days, just talking football and going through an agenda that I had of asking him tons of questions. So that's how it all got started.
John Madden Football was a smashing success and became one of the most memorable and popular video game franchises in the world.
My first EA Sports game, I think, was John Madden Football on the Sega Genesis. And I remember it kind of vividly because it was back in around 1990, I believe, and it was the first time I think I remember seeing a game, especially a sports game, that felt like it had 3D graphics, even though it was still a 2D game with just pixel art sprites that were on the screen. But the way that they made that game was revolutionary at the time because the field kind of felt like you had a more of a traditional modern camera angle, because the field would narrow out as you would move towards the top of the end zone, and the players were more like bulky, and the way they moved around was a little bit more fluid. And I just remember that it just felt like so advanced when it came to the graphics and the even the ball in the air and the gameplay, and it was just something that was beyond anything I had played before.
Thanks to the success of John Madden Football, EA started growing exponentially. With Hawkins at the helm, the company continued to refer to their developers as artists, giving them photo credits in the games, sharing lavish profits with them, and aiming to represent their devs as rock stars. EA delved into other sports games, such as the NBA series, which would eventually be named NBA Live in 1994.
The first EA Sports game that I had experience with was when my parents got me Lakers versus Celtics in the NBA playoffs. That was back in Christmas 1989, I want to say, when they got that. And yeah, like my dad and I bonded off sports games. So we played a lot of that Lakers versus Celtics. But what stuck out to me playing that game, though, the most was the fact that you had signature animations in that game. Like, the only other game I had played that had signature animations in that time was playing Jordan versus Bird.
EA ventured into NHL games as well, which is still a series the company develops titles for today.
My first EA Sports game was actually one of the first EA Sports games, period. NHL hockey for the Sega Genesis, and I absolutely love it. Making the leap from 8-bit to 16-bit, the graphics looked incredible, and the fact that when a puck hit a player in the face and he fell was oddly satisfying.
So when I think back to the first EA Sports game I played, I think automatically back to NHL 96. I was 7 years old, and I remember getting it for the Sega Genesis. My dad came home with it. I think I got it just around Christmas. Not for Christmas, but just around that time. And I remember it was the actual first hockey game I remember playing. I didn't play NHL 94 at the time because I was too young when it came out, and NHL 96 was brand new. And I just remember the thrill I had of something at the time so huge was putting myself in the game. Again, I'm 7 years old, but I'm creating myself as a National Hockey League player, so I thought it was the coolest thing.
EA then became even more ambitious, creating the first ever home video game to feature NASCAR racers with Richard Petty's Talladega, which would eventually spawn their successful NASCAR series.
The first experience I can really remember with an EA game, I want to say, was NASCAR Racing 1998. The best experience I think I had with that game was they had at the time, if you were co-op, they kind of had a way they would level out the speed of each racer. So even if you had somebody that was much slower than you, it would naturally level the cars out, and it allowed you to have a really fun racing experience, even if you had somebody that wasn't traditionally good at racing games.
My first ever EA Sports game was NASCAR Thunder 2003. I thought that was the most perfect racing game when I was a kid, and I still hold it in high regards to this day. NASCAR Thunder 2003 is what really drew me in to NASCAR as a whole. I began watching like that about a year later, but I still continued to play the game. Kevin Harvick's 29 blue Looney Tunes car, I would always race all the time, especially at Richmond International Raceway. That track was so much fun to play in that game, and still is to this day. I remember winning my first ever race in that car and at that track, doing the little burnout celebrations, and then the victory lane sequences were so cool to watch. And then just overall, the career mode was cool. It was really a very immersive motorsports game.
Alongside these sports games, EA continued to make games in many other genres, and was exploding as a company. In 1990, Trip Hawkins stepped down as CEO to work on his next project, the 3DO, which was, at the time, the most powerful game console ever made. He was still a member of EA's chair until July of 1994, and EA was partnered with 3DO, showcasing their latest games such as the first Need for Speed game on the console. Eventually, however, EA would drop its support for the 3DO and develop for the PlayStation, and Trip Hawkins was no longer associated with the company he created. EA continued to thrive, however, although the focus started shifting away from the developers and more towards profit and marketing. EA created a new division known as EA Sports, which was the label all sports games published or developed by EA would have. Into the 21st century, EA Sports had earned a reputation for creating high-quality sports games. Most people would argue that the peak of EA Sports was in the 6th generation era, with the PlayStation 2, original Xbox, and Nintendo GameCube being the consoles on the market. During this generation, EA Sports released games in the following series: FIFA, FIFA Street, Madden, NBA Live, NFL Street, NBA Street, Tiger Woods PGA Tour, SSX, Cricket, Arena Football, Fight Night, NASCAR, MVP Baseball, NCAA Football, NCAA Basketball, NFL Head Coach, Rugby, Formula 1, and NHL. That's 19 different sports series all made by EA under the EA Sports label during one console generation. And at that point in time, nearly all of those games were unanimously praised by critics and players alike. The most commonly thought of franchise from this era is EA Sports' flagship series, Madden.
My first EA Sports game was Madden 03, so I was 10 at the time. It was the first console football game I'd ever played. I played like backyard football on the computer as a kid, but nothing to the extent that Madden was. I loved it so much when we first got it, I would play with my dad. I think the first game we ever played was a 7-7 tie, because neither of us knew how to play the game, and I think we just lucked into 2 touchdowns and then couldn't score in overtime. But I started playing it all the time, especially once I got into franchise mode. It was such a deep mode at the time, and it became a game that I begged my parents to buy for me every year, pretty much on release date. I think my favorite thing to do in the game was the minicamp mode. I think that was in 03, but doing the rushing drills where it was just you and like 2 defenders and maybe you had like a fullback, I could do those all day forever. And the fact that such a simple feature hasn't been implemented into a recent Madden game is just inexcusable. That was so fun and simple, and it made franchise so much better.
My first EA Sports game, it had to be like Madden 2004. I remember my dad buying the GameCube. What was that, like 2003, obviously, because, you know, Madden 2004. And that was like one of the first games we got for it. And obviously you had to go with Michael Vick because he was on the cover. But back then I didn't really know much about any players at all. I was a young tot. I was like 7 at the time, so a young budding Drewski, whatever the right term is. But it was really fun. I think I remember actually beating my dad. I don't know if he was just being polite because I was 7 years old, but I mean, if I was in his position, I'd probably dominate me and go up by like 40 points. Nah, he's just being nice though. It was fun running around with Michael Vick, scoring some touchdowns. Good times. The old days. Back before I even cared what a franchise was or whatever. It was just the simple things. It was like, Dad, you want to play this football game? Let's do it. And then we did. And then I probably broke a controller or 10 because I was a grumpy little 7-year-old. No, that was when I was playing with my brothers, not my dad. Usually good times with my dad.
My first experience with EA Sports games was probably somewhere around Madden 98 to Madden 2000. I used to rent them from Blockbuster back in the day, so that's kind of showing my age a little bit. But the first EA Sports game I ever owned was Madden 2002. I got it for Christmas, and that's when I fell in love with the series, and I haven't missed a year since.
My favorite EA Sports game has to be Madden. I've built my entire channel pretty much on the back of the Madden NFL franchise series, and I don't know if I could pick out a specific game. Madden 07 and Madden 08 are probably right near the top there, the pinnacle of what Madden and franchise should be, in my opinion. And I don't want to pick 07 because of nostalgia, but I mean, that was probably the most fun I've ever had playing Madden. And Madden 08 is definitely near there, if not even above that. I think Madden 08 had some more features and whatnot, but maybe just for nostalgia's sake, I would say that Madden 07 is right there at the top.
One of EA's greatest games ever created was MVP Baseball 2005, which happened to be EA's last licensed MLB game.
That is, to this day, one of the greatest sports games ever made. One of the greatest baseball games ever made, of course. It's just a fantastic baseball game. They have a feature in there that I've been trying to get MLB The Show to put in their game, which is the Creative Ballpark. Fantastic classic feature. So much other things. Their home run derby, and that was just great. It was just a great game. All around great game.
Even in recent years, EA has developed some fantastic games. Most people consider NCAA 14 to be one of the last great EA Sports games.
Obviously, NCAA 14 is my favorite EA produced game ever. Not just because of the amount of teams and customization we did have available during the team builder era, I guess, but because the Dynasty mode was very well thought out, and you could tell at the time that they made that game that the aspects of Dynasty mode were just as important as the Ultimate Team mode that was added in that game. Not to mention, Road to Glory is just such a fun game mode. Sometimes I'll even play it in my own time just for fun. You get to go to high school, get to choose between colleges, work your way up the ranks, and also have side goals like becoming a team legend, hometown hero, which unlocks more routes for you to take when you're there.
So my favorite sports games from EA Sports, man, it's tough, it's real tough, but I would have to pick the NCAA football series. I think that that's a slam dunk, it's a layup. I can't just pick a specific game, I have to pick the entire series because it was so good. It was so good. From Team Builder, the addition of Team Builder, to Road to Glory, the innovation that they were trying to implement with the game from year after year, the pageantry that they captured, College Game Day with Corso, Herb Street, Brad Nessler, like, it just felt like Saturday, man. It just felt like Saturday when they had that presentation.
FIFA 15 is often considered the final great game created by EA Sports.
My first EA Sports game was FIFA 99. I remember playing FIFA 98 around a friend's house, and it was just so much more polished and impressive than any other sports game I'd ever played before. So I asked my parents for FIFA for Christmas, they bought me FIFA 99, and I'm pretty sure I've owned every single FIFA since. There are a couple of games that instantly spring to mind, but for me, my favourite would probably have to be FIFA 15. The gameplay was incredibly fast-paced and frantic, but it was just enjoyable. I played Pro Clubs loads online with friends, I played Career Mode a lot, Ultimate Team a lot, and I just never got tired of playing it.
Even then, when FIFA 15 came out, EA was deep into their fall in quality. It is highly debatable when EA first started to fall off in quality. What most people seem to agree on, however, is that they did fall off, and EA is no longer the same company it once was. The same company that used to refer to their own developers as rock stars changed. Now developers had no creative control. The invention of Ultimate Team led to a new source of revenue and a new way to increase profits. Online play became a major focus, and the competitive scene, along with new ways to play these games, led to nearly every EA Sports franchise either getting cancelled or neglected. A company once known for having everything in the game became known more for what was removed or no longer in the game. Many storied franchises were cancelled or left to die.
I think EA Sports has completely fallen off in terms of quality over the years, and it all started back when the Xbox 360 generation consoles came out, because at that point, it's almost like they turned off the need to try to advance their product, and we all know what happened with the 2K series and how they fell off and got kind of banned from making any NFL games. They lost that license, and we all know the history there. But ever since that happened, it seems like EA Sports and the Madden franchise just totally just died in terms of their quality and their dedication to make a more advanced game. And that goes across the entire spectrum. I mean, we used to have Fight Night, we used to have MVP Baseball. There were a lot of different types of games. We had NFL Blitz, NBA Street. A lot of those games just died on the vine for some reason, and I think that EA, being a company and obviously being a profit earning company, they were all about the dollars, and when it comes to a business, it doesn't always serve the customers the best, especially when you've monopolized certain aspects of the industry. And I think ever since we went to that that generation of consoles, we just witnessed a total downturn when it came to the quality of the game, and I don't think they've ever been able to catch up, and I don't think they really want to. I think that they have reprioritized their focus on monetizing the games as much as possible and trying to get people to pay them as much as possible at any rate with any kind of gimmick, and they've really lost the core aspect of what I thought was a quality game, which is really on the field gameplay, and it's a real shame that's where we are.
Trip created EA Sports because he was passionate about sports. He wanted to create realistic simulations that were fun to play and accessible to everyone. He was passionate about the games he created, and I find it incredibly unlikely that EA's current higher-ups even care about sports at all, given the recent products fans have been dealt with. In 2005, EA signed an exclusive rights agreement with the NFL, removing all competition, which allowed Madden to stagnate. When I asked Trip Hawkins if modern-day EA has lived up to his initial vision, this is what he had to say.
Not really. I know they call the category simulation. And of course, there's a distinction now between the NFL exclusive that EA has on the simulation category and how that is differentiated from the rights that the NFL just gave Take-Two for something that's more of an arcade game. And I think if you look at a great arcade sports game like NBA Jam, that's really fantastical, right? And the players can do magical things, and it's a lot of fun because it's really over the top. And I suppose, Take-Two can go in that direction and do some of that, but Madden does that too.
Yeah. The Madden games are so bad now, it retroactively makes me nostalgic for the Madden games from 5 years ago, which I didn't enjoy at the time, which were still very flawed. EA Sports has absolutely fallen in terms of quality over the years. I haven't bought Madden 20 yet, I don't plan on it, and I'm not going to buy Madden 21 either. For the past few years, Madden, with all its flaws, just makes me so angry to play, angrier than I should be getting while playing a video game, that for my own mental health, I had to stop playing it. I would go into fits of rage. You play these 40-minute games where you're just putting up with crap after crap, but you're still in a position at the end of the game to pull one out, and then your quarterback gets sucked into a strip sack or throws an interception because he threw it 12 yards away from the receiver. Playing in franchise on all Madden, there are so many games where you just feel like the game is trying to get you to lose. They're going to force a loss on you no matter what you do. So finally I committed to a boycott of the game. I'd wanted to do that for a couple of years, but I, like everyone else who plays the game, I just want to play a football game, and there's no other option, so I would keep buying it. But Madden 20 was a year I just said no. Until they can prove to us that they're actually going to put any effort into making a good game, at the very least expanding franchise into a playable game mode, I have no reason to buy the game.
In cases where EA didn't buy out their competition, they failed to match their competitor, as seen with NBA Live. If they had games that weren't massively profitable, they would cancel them, as we've seen with Fight Night, for example. It's almost crazy how drastically the company has changed within the past 2 decades. Where there were once 19 EA Sports franchises, there are now 4.
The potential for sports games is next level, in my opinion. Nowadays, with all the microtransactions and the ultimate teams, it's all shifted to what's going to get us the most money, what's going to get us simple, mind-numbingly boring, surface-level content. Let's just try to throw for 10 passing touchdowns in the next hour and we'll give you this virtual card. Or you can speed it up and not waste your time by giving us your dollars. It's all a scheme, man. Personally, I think microtransactions are a cancer to the gaming industry. Hopefully they'll be illegal within the next 5 to 10 years, because it's legitimately preying on children to get their parents' credit cards and just spend ungodly amounts of money.
I asked Trip how he feels when he sees EA taking punches, whether it's from winning the Worst Company in the World award or just the constant backlash the company gets. As the founder of the company, how does that make him feel?
Yeah, I'm sad to see it. Frankly, as I kind of transitioned away from the company, I could see ways in which the leadership and the culture began to shift away from the way I would have done things. And, it's a little frustrating to see. It's like having your child grow up to be a teenager and, start going off and individuating and doing their own thing. So, that's been a process or a journey for me to kind of get used to that, because EA is kind of like my first child, and it's fully grown. It's a full-up adult, and it's done really well overall. So I've got the pride of a parent about it, and then some of the frustration and disappointment that maybe it could have done some things differently. But this is just the way human life is.
Has EA Sports fallen off in terms of quality over the years? I would have to say yes. I think this goes for most sports games, but EA Sports definitely is on the worst end of this. I mean, you see what happened with NBA Live. They continue to get shelved, and that whole market got taken over by 2K. You look at Madden, they had so many features back in the day that still aren't in the game, now, and it's just kind of weird to see.
Yeah, I'd say that the introduction of Ultimate Team kind of impacted negatively upon the game as a whole. If you look at the changes that have been made to career mode and pro clubs in the last 10 years or so, for example, since Ultimate Team came in, there just hasn't really been enough done with those game modes. You can understand it to a point. Obviously, Ultimate Team makes EA Sports a lot of money, so they're going to put a lot of time and resources into it, but sadly, it's been to the detriment of other game modes, and as a result, the overall quality of EA Sports games in general has suffered.
Obviously, NBA Live has fallen off significantly because we don't even know if there'll ever be another NBA Live and in what format, so that's a significant fall off. But Madden is the one that is still active, that I would say in several areas it has fallen off.
It's all about money. It's all about, selling these DLCs and selling these packs, Specifically with Madden, we already know that Ultimate Team is pretty much king on there now. Franchise has been dead for a while. And in the case with NASCAR games as well, I know this is a different company, but, again, there's, just different DLCs, packs that you have to buy, blah, blah, blah. And really, it's just the level of immersion for these game modes. And really, a lot of sports titles now, it's not up there where it was in the early 2000s. Now, granted, back in those days, online play was rare. Like, we really didn't get that until around 2004, 2005. And then, once we graduated to the next-gen consoles, well, the next-gen back then consoles, PS3, Xbox 360, that's when I really noticed a shift. It was really leaning towards, more online gameplay rather than, these game modes having the levels of immersion that they did back in the day. On the PS2 and the Xbox, like, you definitely needed to have those game modes. They needed to be as immersive as possible because there was no other options back in the day, really. There wasn't really online play until, a few years later.
Well, I mean, ever since they moved to the 360, or the PS3, it just has not been the same. Now we're talking about 2 generations removed going into the next one. I think that, it's all about money, money, money. It's not a situation to where they're just trying to put out a quality product, in my opinion. I mean, they try to do some things to do it, but I think they're more driven towards the money side, to the point where now we're looking at basically you have MUT and tournament guys are basically running the show, and that's what makes the money.
Yes, EA Sports has fallen off in quality, 100%. There's no doubting it. All they really care about these days are the microtransactions, the Madden Ultimate Team mode. That's the thing that gets all the attention, and now it's all like these wacky modes being, promoted by rappers and singers and players themselves. These modes that have nothing really to do with football or side football stuff.
You've got a situation where so many different people come in and out of the program that even if they have a vision that they want to execute, it can easily get lost because you have so many people trying to decipher what may not always be very clear. In addition to that, with EA, you've got a company that is really in the industry rather entry level. So they're going out and they're bringing people in that in some cases are just looking to build a resume for themselves. So if you're starting out and you want to get an entry level programming position, you may find yourself at EA just trying to build a resume for 2 to 3 years and move along. And while that may be great for the individual, the problem becomes, while they're putting Madden programmer on their resume to move forward, they may not have the expertise of dealing with code that what many of us believe is years old, and be able to make meaningful changes no matter what is coming down from a designer in terms of telling them what they need to do. And I think no matter who you have there at EA trying to overall design the game, unless you can get it relayed to a programmer who's capable to do that, it's not going to matter. And I think one of the big issues is that EA just does not have the capability to go and get the best talent to fill those roles, pay that price for those people, because in many cases they've already been to EA, moved forward with their careers, and don't see value in working there any longer.
Now, I'm not going to once blame the actual developers working on the games, because I come from a software development background. I know how hard it is to build out software for people to use that's going to be sold. They're building what they're told to build and how they're told to build it. All of this to me goes to the decision makers and the powers that be, and I blame personally the rise of Ultimate Team, as does a lot of people. But ever since that mode was introduced to EA Sports games, I feel every other mode that people have fallen in love with over the years has been thrown on the back burner or cast aside, never to be seen again.
It just drives me insane when I see people complain about Ultimate Team, and it's like, franchise hasn't received any update at all in nearly a decade. A decade!
I think it's almost indisputable that EA Sports has fallen off in terms of quality, right? I think a big problem circulating with EA right now is there's a lot of passionate people that have worked their careers to get to the jobs that they're in right now, working for EA. The problem, I believe, is the higher-ups not letting them have the freedom to implement the features that the true fans want, basically telling them what the direction of the game is going to be, and oftentimes a direction that is to maximize revenue, which is just really unfortunate, because I really think they have the people in there that can accomplish a lot of the things that we're asking for, but there's a huge disconnect between what the fans want, the people actually working on the game, and then the people in charge of resources and development of the game. And I would really point to that being the biggest problem, and I really hope we see a change in that in the future.
I think one of the problems with a topic like football is that it is extremely challenging to simulate it perfectly. You've got to get, just for starters, you've got to get the physics right. And the physics go into things like, all right, how well are you going to finish this block? And how is the blocker's body going to come off the defender that's trying to shed the blocker? And where's the momentum going? And okay, so I'm leaning to the right, but I'm trying to reach out with my left arm to trip up that ball carrier. I mean, it's just really, really challenging and complicated. Of course, you're trying to lay on the top of some kind of physics engine some other rules about, according to this guy's rating, he's going to make that tackle. No, according to the runner's rating, he's going to break that tackle. You're trying to overlay the statistics around it. And boy, even from the very first time making the first version of that, there would be really aggravating things, like setting up the punt play. I remember how hard it was figuring out how to successfully block all of the people that were rushing to try to block the kick, and there were situations where you couldn't quite get that right, and it was just too easy for one of the blockers to penetrate and block the kick. Well, that's no good. You've got to figure out a whole lot of minute details. And then, of course, even when you've done that, I think some of the best versions of Madden have pretty good simulation. They in history have had versions that produced, scores that are like football, not like basketball, but you still have the money plays. Mm-hmm. So every player is looking for, one or two plays that go to the right or go to the left where they've got a run pass option, and they're watching this, they're keying what their opposing player is doing with their joystick and what player they're controlling and what they're reacting to. And you just know, okay, so if I see him coming in, then I'm throwing. You know,
Yeah.
And I know my guy's going to be open, and it's just too easy to then boil the game down into just choosing between those two plays all day long. That's not football. That's the kind of thing that if I was making a version of the game today, man, that would just drive me crazy, and I would work really, really hard to make sure that, no, this is the real thing. This is authentic, which means you're going to be needing that full playbook. And if you expect to throw that pass for a touchdown, you're going to have to do what John Madden taught me. So, for example, if I'm trying to get you to cheat in to stop the run, I'm going to, first of all, establish a good running game. I'm going to establish certain running plays that are going to make you get conditioned to pursuit when you begin to notice a pattern like, oh, he's running that off-tackle play again. Oh, here it comes again. Here it comes again. And it's just when you start to become familiar with that rhythm, that's when I'm doing the play-action pass, where I'm going to show you all of that. It's all going to look like that same off-tackle running play. But now I'm throwing the ball to the tight end that's wide open because this tight safety or the linebacker that had assigned coverage bit and sold out on the run fake.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's super satisfying when you work hard over the course of a game to set things up that way. You know, and a good coach that's good at play calling, they'll be doing stuff in the first quarter that they're going to be using to set up something that's going to score a touchdown for them in the third quarter. So I love strategy like that, and I really would love it if all the sports simulation games really maintained that kind of authenticity so you could have good strategy.
Obviously, creating a realistic simulation football game is no easy task. But it doesn't even seem like EA is trying to achieve that. With X-Factor abilities, Superstar KO, and the focus of the game being virtual trading cards and simulated gambling, are these even sports games anymore?
I think probably a lot of large corporations especially, they kind of get too disconnected from those kinds of things. They're just, you know, cranking out sausage from that sausage factory, and it's, you know, I think for a lot of big companies, they, you know, just don't have that depth of feeling or care about what they're doing.
EA Sports is hated by most people. NFL fans buy Madden because it's the only NFL game. NHL fans do the same. FIFA features a much wider variety of club licenses compared to its competitor Pro Evolution Soccer. EA makes the only UFC game. Despite the quality of these titles, people will buy them. It's all they have. Could EA even come close to returning to its glory days, when it was at the forefront of innovation in video games? When they supported their developers and gave them the freedom to create what they felt passionate about?
It's really tough to figure out like what they would have to do to get back to their glory days, because we're definitely not in those right now. But for me, it just comes down to like passion. It just comes down to passion. It comes down to caring about your product. It comes to caring about your community. It comes to caring about your game. I think ultimately that's where creativity stems from.
You have a game like Madden, where in 2005, the game had countless features that used to be in the game, and today, in 2020, no longer are. After #Fix Madden franchise went trending #1 in the United States, which was started by Brian Mazik, EA finally acknowledged their neglect of this mode and gave a blueprint of potential fixes for the future. Why did it have to come to that? How disconnected are these executives?
There are so many fundamental flaws with Madden as a game and just as an operation that I don't even know where to start with retooling it to make it better. It's such a big team that it needs to come from the top. There needs to be a consistent direction from the top. Because I've heard stories of certain developers at EA Sports who have good ideas for the game, who want to expand franchise mode and make it a better game mode like it used to be, but they're shut down or they are not given the time to work on it because EA doesn't value that. They only value Ultimate Team because that's the only thing making them money. And until fundamental leadership ever changes, which I don't think it's going to, I don't know if EA Sports can recapture its glory days. The way to fix Madden, the way to fix football games has to come from the NFL. They have to stop giving one crappy company the exclusive rights to the largest sport in America. The fact that 2K is now getting a chance to make an arcade-style game is encouraging, at least it's something, but I think it needs to be the other way around. EA Sports is pretty competent with their fun little game modes. I used to play Draft Champions in like 17, 18, and that was pretty fun, but they don't make a simulation football game.
Competition is the only thing that will bring EA back to its glory. When NFL Game Day came out for the PS1, EA actually got worried and started putting out a decent Madden product. Started putting AI in their code and actually had to get off their ass and figure out what gamers wanted. It's hard because us sports junkies all need our fix, so you can only divert to an FPS game or GTA for so long until you need the high of breaking off a long TD run in OT and winning what you think is a meaningful game. I don't know the definitive answer to this. It's much easier just to point out problems, like a guy never passing for an entire tournament and winning the whole thing, than to find actual solutions. So good luck.
In order for EA to get back to its glory days, the key thing they have to do is allow their devs to thrive. Put them in position to succeed. Put them in the best possible position to develop creatively, allow their thoughts and imagination to run, realistically wild, and give a true simulation football product. I firmly believe EA has more than enough of the talent, but you have to let these people actually thrive, actually build. Not according to the mold of an executive, but to the mold of what's going on in the league.
More time and effort needs to be put into the game modes that have been there for years and that made us all fall in love with EA Sports games in the first place. Career mode needs more love, Pro Clubs needs more features, the servers need improving, and for the future we just need to see more love being shown across the board. Ultimate Team is the EA Sports cash cow, and fair enough, of course they want to milk that, but Ultimate Team isn't the only reason that people buy EA Sports games. I had a look on PlayStation at the trophies the other day, and less than 12% of people have ever even qualified for the Weekend League, so the vast majority of people aren't interested in competitive FIFA, and EA Sports really needs to be making improvements and general changes to game modes across the board.
You should never get mad at the developers for features that don't make it into the game, because I've talked to the developers many times as an EA game changer. I was EA game changer for Madden 18 and 19, and they I was there for a little bit of Madden 20, but that was it. They haven't really responded to me since. That's probably because I said some negative things about the game online, so not likely to bring me back after that. And I also stopped playing the game, but besides the point, the developers are very nice people, and they want to make the game as best as they can make it. They have great ideas. They listen to the feedback. Like we'd bring in ideas every single year. They would be like, yeah, I mean, we've heard this a million times. Like, we want to do this, but it's just either one, technically not even feasible with like the setup they have or whatever, or like it's way above their pay grade to where like it's like we can't even make that call. Like we'll try to present that idea to them, but they'll get shot down because it's either the NFL or it's one of the higher ups. It's almost like depressing to hear that, because like they have to take all the flack on Twitter, and the developers are targeted, but it's like it's not always their fault directly. Like if there's some bugs in the games or something, then that might be more on them, but it's like they can fix that. But big overall features, they don't always get a choice in deciding what goes in. It's the executives, the ones that you should be mad at, because those are the ones calling the shots that are shifting all of EA. You know how like FIFA will try out, like they tried their story mode and then Madden's right behind them. It's probably some top EA executive making the shots for all these franchises. It's like, we need something to fit this demographic. Like they're looking at it as how much can they sell and to what demographic, and to like how can we package it to be more serving for this area. They're not thinking of what's the best football game we can make. And that's probably the main problem that EA needs to fix itself.
EA Sports became famous for its slogan, "It's in the game." Over the past decade and a half, it's become clear that the entire company's focus has completely shifted away from creating quality products. It's easier to point out what isn't in an EA Sports game than what is. Many people take videos like this the wrong way, thinking there is just this angry hive mind who hates EA regardless of what they do. And while those people do exist, myself and everyone involved in this video, we would have no issue with EA if only they went back to creating quality sports video games. We used to love EA Sports, and we just long for a return to form. We are passionate about sports, and video games allow us to interact with them on a level that would otherwise be impossible. All we want is for EA to start focusing on their consumers. Show that you are in touch. Give your developers creative freedom. Instead of blocking people who offer criticism on social media, embrace criticism. Will that ever happen? Who knows? I think it's easier to predict no. Massive corporations don't usually get more in touch with their consumers as they grow. But that doesn't mean we can't hold out hope or come together to create videos like this. Thanks for watching.